We're finally back, Shelby.
Whew, boy did that take us a lot of tries.
More than it probably should have, but we figured it out. We're smart. We can technology.
And let's face it, this game is worth it.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. You may better know me as RayDaug on the various corners of the internet that I frequent. Most notably, the RayDaug Tumblr, where I occasionally write about media, usually anime, sometimes games.
And my name is Shelby. I'm better known as Whining About Yuri, though I do still call myself Shelby. Obviously, as the title implies, I talk about girly things and gay things, but generally I run a similar blog to how Ray does, focusing on media criticism and just seeing what sort of story elements go to things that are usually unrecognized, like games, anime, etc., in the media world.
And we're here with Valhalla, a cyberpunk bartending visual novel that, if you are familiar with us and our writings, you know that we both like a whole lot. It's a game that's real special in a lot of different ways, and that's why we're here with it. We're gonna go through this together and really just kind of pick this apart and figure out what makes this so good.
And that's going to involve, characters, tropes, presentation. We're both very picky of party people, so this can come across like we're just ripping it apart, but no, we really do love this and we just kind of want to delve deeper into it. So just as kind of like your forewarning, another forewarning you should know about is that this is going to be pretty heavy on the spoilers. We are not going to hold back on talking about things that will happen later in game and how they relate to moments in the real time as we record. So if you are looking for a more spoiler-free thing, you might want to look at a different video for that. This is going to be more of a video essay than a straight Let's Play.
Yeah, think of this as a close reading of Valhalla, where also, yeah, this is also a supplement to your playthrough more than a substitution. This game's $15. It's super worth it. Go out and buy it if you have the spare cash, and this at all interests you. We can both vouch for it. It's fantastic.
If anything else, like I said, the soundtrack alone is worth the $15, so...
Oh, yeah. We're going to do just a straight new game. New Game Plus carries over a lot of your money and the things that you buy throughout the game, and you lose a lot of some flavor dialogue here and there that we might want to talk about.
Not to mention you're going to miss out on what we're going to talk about, a very specific feel the game has, but that's a little bit for later. Let's give us more of an introduction of the cogs and bits, namely how the game looks and its aesthetic, and the difference between just being another pixel art game and being something unique that is. Ray, you had a lot to say on this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, this is an independently developed game, if you couldn't tell just by looking at it. I think it was just two guys out in Venezuela?
Venezuela, if I remember
I believe.
correctly.
Pixel art has kind of become the shorthand for independent indie games, and it's started to come to the point where it pushes people away, and part of the problem is that a lot of the pixel art is not done well. In order for pixel art to carry, you need excellent character design, and this game does that. There are obviously pretty anime-inspired characters, but a lot of games think that pixel art is itself an aesthetic instead of a medium. Pixel art is a art style. It's like you have your acrylic painting, you have watercolor, you have pixel art.
So basically,
pixel art isn't its own style. It's a way to convey design and stuff.
And a big thing that saves this game, not even saves, it's very well crafted in just the actual mechanisms and how it puts itself together. I mean, the pixel art itself is fantastic for the most part, like with one or two very small exceptions, but it's more of the aesthetic that they're getting at that's really kind of takes it out of the water, and it's kind of more of a futuristic, kind of modern, critiquey vibe, but also kind of being a more herald throwback to more traditionally anime tropes and visual designs, and it really pulls off both very, very well. And I think that's kind of why it just manages to stand out as a good-looking game, not only in its mechanics, but also in just the vision that it's trying to convey. So here we are at the main screen.
So I was already on board whenever I first heard the essential premise of this game back whenever they were putting out demos and the prologue and stuff like that. I'm a sucker for Cyberpunk. I like it a whole lot. I'm not huge on visual novels for the most part. They're not really my thing, but the gameplay that we'll get into in just a little bit that it has really kind of won me over along with the core premise. But loading up the actual game, walking directly into a G Gundam reference is what really, won me over.
It's like they knew who this was for.
And that person is me.
Mm-hmm. And me.
So this is one of two main gameplay sections of Valhalla. Jill's apartment. This is our main character, Jill, her cat, 4, and her Spartan, poor 20-something-year-old apartment.
Very accurate, if I may say.
Yes. And this is her phone, which has various applications that get unlocked throughout the story of the game as it progresses. Right now, we can change the music if we wanted to, but why would we? Because this track's really good. They're all really good, really. We can save our game, and we also have the Augmented Eye, which is the BuzzFeed-like sort of clickbait news site that Jill frequents.
It's kind of a combination for, like, the backstory kind of cul-de-sac plot dumping for all the stuff that we just kind of basically need to get out of the way so we can have a better context of what the world is, media commentary, and just good humor all around. And it's another good thing that starts setting up how this game works, which is there's a very big cyberpunk background story, but ultimately, as the game developers themselves have admitted, it's more for just looking at the characters, their day-to-day lives, and how they get by. And it does it with a very dry wit and a very frank look at everything that's going on, but not with really kind of a big, hammery, here's an essay to write about this moral message. It's a very starkly real is probably the best way to put it, and how it really sets itself up to be with this just being another element of it. Especially as you can see, Jill will just kind of often have these off comments about all of the articles that are everything from her actual opinions to just completely it's really not worth my time, this is just stupid.
Now, hold that thought on Cyberpunk.
Mm-hmm. Here's me holding.
But yeah, it's the comments that Jill have are often, they're really good ways to characterize Jill, and the articles themselves, give backstory on the world. It's really slick. But this article here highlights one of my bigger complaints about the game, is that its humor sometimes relies too much on references. This article here is just a big, huge reference to Metal Gear at large, but specifically Metal Gear Rising. You have the cyborg in heels fighting terrorists. Jill even says the rules of nature over here. And it can be very distracting, the number of references there are.
It's a safe thing to say that the in-joke aspect of the game is kind of its biggest Achilles heels, and this kind of comes up in a lot of different ways. But just base anime references in 2070 something is certainly a big thing, number one.
Right, but on the subject of Cyberpunk, I think one of the smartest choices that they made, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but was using the Cyberpunk backdrop to tell personal stories. Cyberpunk as a genre, people quibble over when it really kind of got started, but most people agree that it really came into its own in the 80s and 90s, the big things being Blade Runner and Neuromancer, that really kind of codified the genre and its tropes. But it was born out of a collective anxiety about technology and its rapid development. The 80s were a time for rapid, especially consumer electronic developments, but also a time where automation was becoming real big, and people were being displaced by this changing technological landscape. You had workers losing their jobs to machines. You had, pen and paper accountants being outpaced by computers and all that kind of stuff. People were very anxious and pessimistic about the way technology was kind of taking over things. And Cyberpunk really kind of was born out of that. And a lot of the tropes that you see, government via corporation, technological isolation, transhumanism, came from that anxiety. But Cyberpunk fell out of favor in especially the turn of the century, around 2000. Cyberpunk started really falling out of favor for two big reasons. It either got things super right or completely wrong. As far as the social aspects of the Cyberpunk universe that we often see, corporatocracies, mass invasion of privacy, that sort of thing, we kind of live in that world now. We could debate about specifics, but a lot of the that stuff, the way we view society in the Cyberpunk universe, that's our day-to-day reality now. But on the technological side of things, Cyberpunk got it completely wrong in a lot of ways. Technology now is sort of the hero. We're a lot more optimistic about technology. Technological jobs are the future, and we see things like social media and smartphones and stuff as being the equalizers in conflicts between citizenry and their governments. So it's no longer the lone hacker and a cyberpar punching deck to hack the replicants. It's people collaborating. Technology hasn't, stratified and isolated us from one another. In a lot of ways, it's brought us together. And that sort of took the wind out of the Cyberpunk sails. But there's still plenty to be mined. And a lot of that comes in the personal stories, which is what we get here in Valhalla.
Going off of that, one of the big things that has kind of survived in our day-to-day world, which is corporatocracies, government, just the general anxiety, even just ultimately class disparagement, which a lot of older Cyberpunk was really big on, is just something a lot of us do live in today. And I think the team was very smart in knowing when to actually focus on the more human aspects that we can relate to, and knowing how to satirize and kind of either poke in good fun for kind of the more archaic things, or otherwise just kind of give them a little bit more of an uncomfortable modern context in how ultimately the fact that they brought in social media as a big part of the game, and I mean a really, really big part of the game, as you're going to see more in the Augmented Eye and the more apps that they bring on Jill's phone. I think they just kind of really modernized it in having a healthy awareness of that strength and weakness, and knowing when to just kind of apply that, as Ray said, more to character stories, and kind of more to a small scale micro story of just how the everyman gets by rather than how the super computer hero would get by. So I think that is kind of one of the big strengths of the game, and especially if you're somebody like me who's kind of not so much into the cyberpunk genre and a little bit iffy on some of its finer points, you can just still be on board, because this is a kind of just a bit of a grudgy but otherwise fantastic reality with great characters, a very trying to find the real in a somewhat ridiculous presence, and kind of doing a better job just because it is so starkly real, while seemingly, being 10,000 years in the future, and you're hanging out with robo-prostitutes and brains in jars, etc. So it's just... Go right ahead.
So, this is... Did you read him as Gil or Jill?
I always read him as Gil, though I think it's supposed to be a pun.
Because, there's instances where characters will call out for our main character, Jill, and Gil will answer, But he's one of the few character designs I think actually didn't land it. And
Dana,
here's a perfect, for instance, of why I think why. You have side by side. You have Gil and you have Dana. Dana's coming at you at kind of a slight angle. She's not dead on, and the shading helps, you know, sculpt the face and give it shape. Whereas you have Gil, who's looking at you dead on, and the shading's kind of flat, and makes it like his nose is a little bit indistinct.
And just like his forehead looks a little weird, and just generally, it's rule 1 of art, especially rule 1 of profiles, is unless you really, really are in it to win it, don't do a straight-on portrait for anyone. Like, perfect side portraits even look better in comparison.
But this is the boss, Dana. There are 2 characters that you can really argue are the best. She's one of them.
And she doesn't like win by any small stroke. She's just pretty objectively incredible. It's really hard to write a boss-like character as either just being a monster or your best friend, and they just kind of strike a good balance between like the totally reasonable authority figure while still being completely human. And since her role in the story is going to be kind of the central force, more or less, in everyone's lives, it was a very good choice to make, and it really, really works well, especially since, as you're going to see, things tend to go very wrong very fast over the course of the story for pretty much everyone.
But we're coming up onto the real big choice of this game, which is, what is your playlist? One of the features of this game is that the soundtrack of this game, smartly, is featured very prominently. It's a mechanic almost.
And it was also very, very prominent in the promotional information, like the forefront. And so yeah, like I said, Ray was hooked on this game just because he pretty much had the playlist fired up for years before it actually came out.
So I'm gonna do my best to give everyone a good sampling of some stuff, because I know what my playlist is and I could listen to that all day, and sometimes I do, but I don't need that right now.
So it's one of those things, the soundtrack is just so good. There's like I'm not sure if it's just like a testament to the writing or just the track, but nothing really clashes no matter what you throw down. And just like that's such a big new game plus thing. It's like, what is all those exclamation points? I want everything, everything.
There are some pieces that I have from the soundtracks that I don't have unlocked yet, and it really bothers me. So this is also what I think is one of the few missteps of the way this game is paced, is opening up with Donovan and Ingram.
Especially, go right ahead.
They're not fundamentally bad, but they don't do a good job of setting up the overall tone of the game.
Especially since...
And they also...
Oh, I'm so
They
sorry.
also don't really go anywhere as far as their individual plot arcs go, so you're opening us up with these characters that there's not a lot to be invested in.
Especially Donovan here, who's like really, really front heavy in his presence and how much he explains to you and how much ultimately of the world around you he's introducing, but he kind of peters out very fast. You don't really see a lot of him, I would even say, after about Act 1-ish of the whole game. And another thing that's kind of thing is that they're kind of also the most characteristically weak characters. I mean, especially with Donovan, you're always going to tread a hard line because he's basically pretty unrepentant and will tell you to his face, which is a good way to establish how kind of corrupt, I suppose, the upper rungs of the world are. Just somebody who's just said, well, everything's gone to shit, so I'm just gonna embrace it and milk it for all it's worth. But there's really kind of not much that you can really chew on after that point. So it's one of those things.
He's pretty shallow in that regard.
So it's kind
Not that he can't be entertaining.
But even I kind of have mixed feelings on entertaining, but that's kind of more of a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because on the one thing, he is awful. He is a rampaging misogynist. He is kind of unrepentingly corrupt and cruel to both his employees and even Jill, like, right to her face. But he still kind of has, like, a very witty writing, which is just both good in that he's fun to read, but also just kind of bad in that I kind of don't want this character to be humanized. I don't want to be able to relate, or even just kind of have jokes that he puts clearly on other people's expense while the joke really isn't on his. And like I said, that's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because, like, he's a bad person. What are we going to do? But I guess, like, as he's handled, the best thing that you really could have done was just to have him be more of a sound box, telling you exactly what's going on, and then just kind of shooing himself out before we actually get kind of the more humane, complicated subplots. So, you win some, you lose some.
I will say that he does highlight one of the strengths, I think, of the writing in, you know, some of his lines. The game doesn't really shy away from social commentary, but it does it in a way that it's almost presenting it. It's bringing to light issues, but without really presenting them with commentary. It gives you just enough for you to really draw your own conclusions without the characters being used as mouthpieces for a particular message.
And I guess that is true. You kind of need somebody like him to be as utterly unrepentant to get across that, oh, this is kind of not good. I can see how this is the kind of person that would survive in this world and actually do fairly well for himself, but And I think that's kind of another good thing, in that social commentary does come up a lot in-game, but it is just kind of treated as an uncomfortably real, more of everybody's just trying to get along and just do their best to just live day by day. Like, the very times that you'll have, like, anyone sit down and actually, like, debate the issues in the future where we're going, not only are they kind of always presented in a two-sided issue, but in a way that works, but is also just kind of oddly sad and kind of honestly handled sort of abstractly, with most of people's real concerns just, how am I going to pay rent today?
Yeah, whatever those do happen, it comes off less as, you know, we are a didactic, you know, dialogue on a particular topic, and more as two characters with an ethos that disagree.
Mm-hmm. And another good thing is to talk about the gameplay, and I think that you could explain just pretty well, right?
So, the core gameplay of this game, and it is a game, we could, you know, split hairs and quibble about whether or not a visual novel is actually a game or not. And in a case of, like, something like Kindred Spirits on the Rooftops, I would err on the side of that's actually not a game because there's no meaningful player input. The core way you interact with this game is through mixing drinks. That is your choices in this visual novel. Unlike other visual novels where Jill is given dialogue choices and you have to decide which one you want to pick, and that's how you find your branching paths. The way you choose and find those paths is through what drinks do you mix for people and what do you give them? Do you give them the thing that you ordered, or do you give them the thing that they want? Or do you give them the thing that they don't want because you don't like that character? And certain events happen based on what drinks you serve. This game's been out for a little while. People have already plotted out all the different courses the game can take. It's not terribly complex, but given the quality of the writing on all of them, I don't hold that against them, especially since this is already a fairly abstracted system. The story flags are not... It's very hard to tell whenever a drink will matter. Mm-hmm. It's nearly impossible. But
honestly, I think
the serving of drinks... Go ahead.
Of course. I honestly just kind of think that's kind of one of the big things that's just kind of a plus for the game. Is just, like, innovation aside, it just kind of makes the experience of both actually being a player in it and actually being a spectator in the story just very seamless. Like, obviously games have struggled for years and still do with just trying to find ways to make gameplay an element that's ultimately contributing to the story and the storytelling experiences, obviously to mixed degrees of success. But this one, I really never feel like, okay, I'm watching a cutscene, okay, I'm suddenly playing the game, okay, I'm watching a cutscene. It's very simple, and I wouldn't, like, exactly call the gameplay itself something to write home with it, but I'm honestly okay with it just being innovative enough just to keep that experience feeling real. Especially since there are stakes in this game, like, a lot. Especially when we get more into the elements of basically kind of more of the life management and living on the day-to-day paycheck aspect of the game. And I know that Ray has words for that in particular.
Your paycheck is determined by how your quality of service. For instance, Donovan here has been ordering beers. The first time he ordered, he asked for 1 beer. I play this game. I know he wants large beers, which is you double the ingredients for the drink. If I gave him a regular-sized beer, I would have gotten less money, which would give me less spending money. At the end of your shifts, before you go to work again, Jill wants something from the shop, usually, or she'll want money to renew a subscription or pay her rent. And if you can't fulfill that want for Jill with the money that you have, she's distracted at work the next day and won't remember what drinks people order. And that makes it more difficult to then give the right drinks to make more money and creates a cascading failure scenario.
Not to mention
and that really helps characterize, like, makes you sympathize with Jill and the situation that she's in, living the paycheck to paycheck, trying to budget for leisure whenever you have such narrow margins, and what can happen when just one thing goes wrong.
Especially since more toward late game, not only does it get a lot harder to make all of your duties and your budgeting, but it also gets... the drink orders themselves get very opaque, so it becomes, like, even more necessary than ever just to have Jill just be able to either remember them, just so you can even just sort of sit back and think, what would be the best one for me to do, both for a money out point perspective and for a customer good order perspective.
It also, helps to show how difficult and stressful it can be to live kind of on tips, because there are instances where patrons will come in and order abstractly. They won't order, they won't say, I want a Moonblast. They'll say, like, I want an uneven drink, or I want a balanced one, or I want one named to commemorate a friend. And if you don't, even though the patron is kind of being shitty with the way they're ordering, they're still the ones that pay you. So you have to do your best to fulfill that want from them, even though they're doing their damnedest to make sure that you can't.
And, like, just jumping off of this, once again, this is all told through subtext. Like, we never have Jill really just sit down and have a breakdown, oh god, what am I going to do? I can't make rent moment. Like, this is all
this
just...
is all... It's all story told via the pretty simplistic gameplay.
And it's just something that makes it work. And honestly, from just a game perspective, I can just really basically appreciate that. I really don't need this to have kind of like a bangs and whistles, be an amazingly smooth machine. I can just appreciate it for just making the story that much more of a nice, clean flow.
I saw some people complaining that the way this game sort of positioned itself, or maybe some people thought about it, they were thinking that this was going to be another Papers, Please, another indie pixel game, where the gameplay is doing a job. In Papers, Please, you work as a border agent, where you're checking people's papers and deciding who gets into the country and who doesn't. And again, there's also a lot of paycheck involved and family obligation management with that as well. But this game's not quite that. I see how it could have been, and I'm not sure it would have necessarily been better for it, but some people were turned off by the simplicity. But I think overall, there's just enough gameplay here to keep you engaged, and the writing is good enough, more than good enough, to carry you through the rest of it.
Especially since the game itself is, for a visual novel, a very, very lean package. Like, you can probably, if you're timing yourself, finish this in like 10-ish hours, maybe even less. So, it's one of those things that's another thing that's really working to its benefits. It's kind of always, for a game like this, straddling the line between, like, I'm glad this is nice and succinct and tied up in a neat little bow, and I want more, but I'll get more into that later once the plot really starts kicking into gear.
Yeah, this game does not overstay its welcome, which I would rather want more than want less. Like, there's plenty of games that go on for too long that end up souring my overall takeaway from them. But this game is exactly as long as it needs to be.
Also, like, literally don't expect this guy to ever order anything else from other than a beer, which towards late game is like, yes, free money. Also, just kind of a minor thing, it's even just an interesting moral choice and just kind of feeling like, do I want to deliberately bungle this person's order and throw them under the table to get a potential branching path? I don't know, maybe that's just me.
There are some characters I want to throw under the table just for myself, not even for branching paths.
Yeah, that's fair. Figures this guy's like an iron elephant, though. I think it would be impossible. Now, he's a straight-on that works. I think it's just because he's got a very well-defined brow. And a very dashing mustache.
The mustache carries a lot. The mustache is strong.
Honestly, like, you're gonna run into a lot of, like, character designs that are just absolutely brilliant in just the, why didn't I think of that?
But, one instance of that sort of presenting it without commentary, we might have missed it already. But there's a point where Donovan goes on about, like, people getting offensive and people getting offended and having too thin a skin, and how they need to toughen up. That was one thing that really kind of shows the strength of, like, the way they present their commentary in this game, because I was seeing a lot of people react to that line and saying, like, yeah, finally someone's willing to give it to those darn SJWs and how sensitive they are. And I was also seeing people on the flip side saying, I'm glad that they put those words in the mouths of a complete dirtbag, like they should be.
I'm kind of more in the latter category, if you can probably guess. Because Donovan is a dirtbag, and it's just like they gave just like this one good line from Jill, who's like, I can get where he's coming from, but God, really? And honestly, it just even kind of captures just the stress, I think, of working as a girl in this kind of profession, where people think they can just literally walk up to you and pretty much just, for lack of a better term, shit all over your face, and you can only just sort of nod along. I'm probably going to get into it a little bit later, because this game has a lot to say about female harassment, and I think how it handles it is ultimately a very big positive compared to a lot of other medias. Obviously, it's kind of, well, it's not like a perfect home run knockout of the park, but I think it did make a lot of really big steps forward that I really wish that a lot of people would take note of. But I think there are going to be more appropriate moments later in the game to really discuss that, especially when we kind of get into Alma's character, who's going to come up soon. So now, the other problem with the game is, like, I can get bringing Donovan in right out of the bat. I can get bringing this dirtbag in to introduce everything. It probably wasn't a good idea to make them two in a row. Especially since it does kind of give you a false sense of what the game and the cast is going to be.
Yeah, it doesn't, them back to back don't set up the tone well, or like the overall, like, what the cast is going to be like. And they don't pan out as characters really in big ways. There's no real payoff to staying invested in them. But the Ingram is another example of just really good character design and how that design can convey things without even saying them, just the next scene here.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of that furrowed brow, but in that kind of way that's kind of in that place between just angry but also just tired. Like, you want to have the energy to be pissed off at everything and you just can't muster it. But God, he's wearing that leather jacket, so he's gonna try.
He likes the music though, so he's not completely bad.
Yeah, that's the only thumbs up we can give him. Just like, yeah, I do have good taste. Also, another great thing about the game is that it constantly implies that Dana is something supernaturally amazing, and Jill spends, like, the entirety of the game questioning everyone to try to figure out why everyone is just completely, literally afraid of her every time she enters the room, and she never finds out. It's great.
And Ingram right here just straightens right up as soon as he sees Dana.
And, like, this is a guy who can kind of just pretty much literally spit in someone's face and not feel consequential about it at all.
Yeah, that's the big mystery of Dana is, how did she lose her arm?
And why'd she get a robot arm? Honestly, maybe it's just the first playthrough, but there are kind of like a thing where we always seem to know way too much about characters we don't care about, and always just very tragically little about characters that we do. Obviously, there's kind of a bit more of a branching path jump down the rabbit hole thing later, but I think that's another really nice touch, and kind of an interesting commentary in and of themselves, and just, I don't know, it's kind of true to life that really uninteresting people talk about themselves a lot. And
I also think from just a writing standpoint, though, that it's the smarter choice. I'm not a big fan of this brave new world that we live in, where every single character and every single series gets their own spin-off. I think I'd rather know not enough than too much about a character, and I think right now, at least, the trend is that, like, we want to know every single thing about every single character, where I think the mystery is character. Like, it says a lot about Dana that there isn't a straight story about her arm.
So yeah, speaking of, like, very frank harassment.
Yeah.
Well, you know, whatever. I'll just kind of go on this mini tirade. Like, this is what you're going to be looking forward to anyway. I really like how this game kind of portrays harassment. Just, like, it's always kind of a bit of a sticky situation whenever you get into things like sexual harassment, assault, etc. Just because of the great how do you portray this without glorifying it, etc. But I know that one thing too often is that people tend to use it for two reasons. To A, humanize the antagonist, or B, be a point of titillation, basically, for the audience. And thankfully, Valhalla very much does the case for neither. It's usually used as a characterization of, once again, just kind of an otherwise unspoken characterization of these people as not only being bad, quote, 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 but also just kind of being empty and worthless and having kind of no concept of how to form a decent relationship with another human being, rather than just use this as another opportunity to just further objectify and humiliate the victim. And also, it's kind of just sort of stark in that this is kind of like very, very uncomfortable, but also just kind of a painful, real thing that women just kind of have to bite their tongue and work through anyway. So it's not perfect, and I am going to have like a couple problems, but I really do count this as a step in a good direction, especially compared to so many other things that I have seen when trying to tackle this subject matter. Especially for games that I think have the temptation to be kind of more apologisty and kind of just give the actual person a sympathetic backstory. But once again, this guy Ingram here, I guess technically he does, but he also falls off the face of the universe pretty quickly and nobody really cares, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah, there's also a third category that, you know, sexual assault and harassment is often used for in media, which is window dressing. It's used as a way to create a setting where the victims don't matter, and even the perpetrators don't matter. All that matters is that it's happening, which is also bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also something that Valhalla doesn't 100% avoid it, but it like 90% avoids it.
It does a lot better than most. Like, ultimately having kind of like a victim who is a protagonist and just basically trying to find the most polite way to tell someone to shut up is already a point forward, instead of just kind of the screaming woman and the creepy guy jumping out of the bushes. And while it's kind of used to kind of characterize the world as just being dark, it's really kind of not used that much, nor is it used in that kind of uncomfortably sticky, let's try to make this as real as possible way that I see a lot of. And I can't quite put my finger on how.
This game's ahead of the curve on a lot of tough subjects, either, you know, deliberately or accidentally, but it does a good job in places where most media, not even games, most media drops the ball.
Honestly, to the point where it's a little upsetting, because it just does so good, like, that few 10 or 5% that it misses on just, like, feels like a cheese grater on your face, like, ah! This is like, I know I can relax into a nice, smooth ride, so just that one big bump in the curb just makes it all the worse.